Have you ever found yourself lying in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, with your mind full of worries about what the future holds? Who hasn't been there, right? The bills, challenges at work, health, the future of your children. It all feels like an impossible mountain to climb. But what if I told you that God already has a perfect plan for your life? Yes, that's right. What seems uncertain to you today is already under His care. God invites you to rest in His providence because He knows what's best for you. If you feel like anxiety is taking over your heart, stay with me until the end of this video because I'm going to show you how trusting in God's plan can completely transform the way you face life's challenges. No matter how big the storm is, there is a divine peace that only God can give you, and today you will learn how to access it. We're going to talk about faith, surrender, and the power of prayer so that you can live with more peace and less worry. Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel and give a thumbs up. This helps us continue to bring this message to more people who need to hear this word of comfort and faith. And if you are in need of help, leave your prayer request in the comments, and we will be praying for you. Share this message with someone you love so more people can discover that God has a perfect plan for each of us. Overcoming worry about the future. Worrying about the future is something that affects practically everyone at some point. When we think about things like bills to pay, unfinished projects, or the safety of our loved ones, fear and anxiety can easily take over. However, in the midst of all this, there is a clear invitation. Trust in God. The teaching from Matthew chapter 6, verse 34, reminds us that the future is already in His hands. Jesus Himself instructs us not to worry about tomorrow because each day has its own challenges. Faith in the future and rest in God are essential for living with peace. When we look around, it's easy to understand why so many people feel overwhelmed. The news, the fast pace of modern life, and even the expectations we set for ourselves contribute to this whirlwind of emotions. However, the Bible calls us to reflect on a truth. God's plan for our lives is already set. Even in moments of uncertainty, He takes care of us. This Christian reflection invites us to surrender our worries to God, trusting that He knows the best path. Many times, worries seem justified. After all, who doesn't worry about providing for their family or their own health? However, when we pause to observe how divine providence has worked in our lives so far, we realize that in every difficulty, there is an invisible hand of God guiding us. A good example of this is the story of Joseph in Egypt. He was sold as a slave by his own brothers, but instead of losing hope, Joseph trusted in God's plan. Years later, he became the second highest authority in Egypt, showing that even in adversity, God already has everything under control. In practice, one way to deal with anxiety about the future is simple but powerful. Prayer. Prayer is the moment when we can give our worries to God, acknowledging our limitations and His sovereignty. It can be difficult at first, especially when we're used to trying to solve everything on our own. However, as we create the habit of praying, our faith strengthens, and the weight of uncertainty diminishes. A recommended practice is to start the day with a prayer of surrender, asking God for wisdom and peace to face the situations that lie ahead. Another important point is learning to live in the present. Anxiety is fueled by excessive worry about tomorrow, but Jesus teaches us to live one day at a time. When we focus on the present, we begin to notice the small blessings that surround us daily. Instead of drowning in future worries, we can practice gratitude for what God has already given us. This doesn't mean ignoring the challenges ahead, but rather trusting in God's care and providence. In our journey, there will always be reasons for worry. However, unshakable faith in God gives us the strength to overcome any anxiety. It reminds us that we are not alone and that God's plan is perfect, even when we don't fully understand it immediately. A practical exercise is to replace every thought of fear or doubt with a promise from God. Each time anxiety arises, remember that He is in control and that nothing escapes His care. As we reflect on all of this, it's natural to ask ourselves, how can we fully trust something we can't see? This is where faith comes in. Faith in the future and trust in God aren't based on what we can predict or control, but on the certainty that He is already taking care of everything. This brings us rest and allows us to live with more lightness. It's like taking a step forward on a dark path, knowing that God's light will always be one step ahead, guiding us to the next point. Biblical teachings on trusting in God. Throughout the Scriptures, we find many lessons that teach us the importance of trusting in God's plan for our lives. One of the most powerful teachings on this is found in Matthew chapter 6, verses 25 to 27. Jesus reminds us that we should not worry about what we will eat, drink, or wear, for God, in His providence, takes care of us just as He takes care of the birds of the sky and the lilies of the field. This Christian reflection invites us to trust in God's care for every aspect of our lives, knowing that He is attentive to each of our needs. Many times, anxiety prevents us from seeing how much God has already acted in our favor. By focusing on our worries, we forget that the Bible is full of examples of how God cares for His people, even in seemingly desperate situations. The story of Moses leading the people of Israel through the desert is proof of this. Even in the face of hunger and thirst, God provided manna and water from the rock. These episodes show us that instead of giving in to worry, we should strengthen our unshakable faith and trust that God will provide what is needed, even when everything seems uncertain. The practice of handing over our worries to God does not develop overnight. It requires discipline and, above all, a change in perspective. Instead of trying to control every variable in our lives, we must surrender to divine control. When we fully trust in divine providence, we begin to view the future with less anxiety and more hope. This doesn't mean we won't face challenges, but that in the face of them, we can rest in God, trusting that He knows what's best for us, even when we don't understand His ways. It's interesting to note how trust in God also helps us live with more peace and less stress. The Bible invites us to reflect on the fact that, instead of trying to predict the future, we should learn to live in the present with wisdom. The lesson of the birds that neither sow nor reap, yet are fed by God, is a reminder that even in the most difficult times, He is taking care of every detail. Just as these birds do not worry about tomorrow, we are called to rest in God's plan and live with more lightness and trust in the present. Trusting in God's plan is ultimately an act of surrender. Surrendering our fears, anxieties, and plans into His hands is a daily exercise of faith. A practical example of this can be found in the story of Hannah, who prayed incessantly for a child. Despite her anguish and the delayed response, she handed her request over to God, and in due time, she was blessed with the birth of Samuel. This teaches us that even when we don't see immediate results, God is working behind the scenes, preparing the best for us. Another way to apply these biblical teachings in everyday life is by cultivating the habit of reflecting on God's promises. When anxiety tries to dominate our thoughts, we can remember verses that reinforce His faithfulness and care, such as in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6, which exhorts us not to be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer, present our requests to God. By doing this, we find peace and renew our trust in God. Trusting in God is an ongoing process that strengthens as we experience His care in our lives. Each small step of faith we take brings us closer to Him and helps us overcome anxiety. When we open ourselves to let Him guide our paths, the peace and security that come from this surrender become a solid foundation to face what the future holds. This prepares us to live fully, knowing that God's care never fails and that He always fulfills His promises. Living in the present. The wisdom of living in the present is a powerful teaching that is often overlooked amid the worries of daily life. When Jesus instructs us not to worry about tomorrow, He reminds us that the moment we have in our hands right now is the most important. By focusing excessively on what is to come, we miss the opportunity to fully experience what God is doing in our lives today. Faith in the future is necessary, but it is only sustained when we learn to rest in God in the present, trusting that He is taking care of every detail. One of the greatest obstacles to living in the present is anxiety. It robs us of our peace and makes us believe that tomorrow will bring insurmountable problems. However, the Bible teaches us through various stories that God's care is constant. Elijah, for example, when fleeing, was fed by ravens sent by God, a proof that divine providence operates in unexpected ways. Thus, instead of allowing ourselves to be consumed by anxiety, we are called to trust in God's plan and notice the blessings He is already providing us today. Living in the present also means learning to appreciate the small things. In our constant pursuit of great achievements, we often ignore the simple yet valuable moments that are part of our daily lives. The practice of gratitude is an excellent tool to bring our focus back to the present. By thanking God for small victories, relationships, and even the challenges that help us grow, we are acknowledging His hand in every area of our lives. This strengthens our unshakable faith and gives us the confidence needed to move forward one day at a time. A practical example of how living in the present can impact our lives is the way we relate to the people around us. When we are worried about the future, we often fail to pay attention to the needs and feelings of those by our side. By living more presently, we are more able to offer our support, time, and attention genuinely. This not only strengthens our relationships but also allows us to be instruments of God's care in the lives of others, creating a cycle of blessings. However, living in the present doesn't mean we should ignore the future. On the contrary, trusting in God's plan allows us to look to the future with hope but without the weight of anxiety. Faith in the future is rooted in the trust that God has already prepared the way, and our task is to walk one step at a time. When we look at the story of Jesus calming the storm, we realize that divine peace is always available, even amidst turbulence. This peace helps us face the present with serenity, knowing that God is in control. For those seeking practical ways to live more in the present, simple actions can make a big difference. Dedicating daily time to meditate on God's Word, pray, and reflect on the day's blessings are ways to reconnect with the now. It's also important to avoid the temptation to solve all problems at once. The Bible teaches us that each day brings its own challenges, and when we overload ourselves with tomorrow's worries, we ignore the strength God gives us to deal with the present. This journey of learning to live in the present is continuous and requires practice. Each day is an opportunity to trust more in God and less in our own strength. By surrendering our worries to Him, we find the rest and peace we seek. It is this trust that allows us to move forward, not with haste or anxiety, but with the tranquility that God is guiding every step. And as we learn to live in the present, we discover that life becomes richer, fuller, and more aligned with the divine care that surrounds us daily. The power of faith and prayer. Faith is one of the most important pillars in the Christian life. It not only connects us to God, but also provides us with a solid foundation to face daily challenges. When we cultivate unshakable faith, we begin to see the world differently, with more confidence in God's plan and less fear of uncertainties. And through prayer, this faith is strengthened. Prayer is the channel through which we give our concerns to God and, in return, receive peace and discernment. It is a practice that helps align our thoughts and desires with divine will. Throughout Scripture, we find many examples of people who experienced the transformative power of prayer. One striking example is Daniel, who prayed 3 times a day, even knowing that it could lead him to the lion's den. Daniel's trust in God was so great that he preferred to face danger rather than abandon his daily communion with the Creator. This example shows us that by placing our trust in God, we can face even the most challenging situations with the certainty that He is in control. Prayer is undoubtedly a powerful tool to overcome anxiety and strengthen our faith. A practical way to apply the power of prayer in our daily lives is to set specific times for this practice, just as Daniel did. It doesn't matter if the routine is busy. It's essential to find time to connect with God, whether in the morning, at night, or during a break in the day. Additionally, it's important not to limit prayer to moments of need. We should also pray in gratitude, acknowledging God's care in every aspect of our lives. By doing this, we cultivate a deeper faith, based not only on requests but also on a continuous relationship of trust with the Heavenly Father. The power of faith, when combined with prayer, brings surprising results. The Bible is full of examples of men and women who experienced miracles through their trust in God. The example of the woman who suffered from bleeding for 12 years and, in a simple act of faith, touched the hem of Jesus' garment and was healed teaches us that even the smallest faith can move mountains. This type of faith doesn't arise overnight but is cultivated daily through prayer and surrender to God. It gives us the ability to face life with courage and serenity, knowing that God is always present. What is most beautiful about the combination of faith and prayer is that it allows us to experience divine peace, that peace that surpasses all understanding. Even when circumstances are adverse, trusting in God's plan brings us calm. A practical exercise we can adopt is to, in prayer, ask God to help us trust more in Him and less in circumstances. This may seem simple, but by doing it regularly, we begin to notice a change in our attitude towards difficulties. We stop worrying about what we can't control and start resting in God. Faith is a constant exercise, and prayer is the means by which we strengthen it. Often, the answers to our prayers do not come immediately, but that doesn't mean God isn't listening. Just as a farmer patiently waits for the harvest after planting the seed, we must also learn to wait for God's perfect timing. That time is always right, and when we trust Him, we discover that all things work together for our good. This Christian reflection encourages us to maintain a posture of trust and total surrender to divine care. The journey of faith and prayer is one of the most rewarding we can embark on. With each step, each answered prayer, our trust in God strengthens, and our anxiety decreases. No matter how big or small the challenge, faith teaches us that we can trust in God's plan, and prayer gives us the strength to keep moving forward. It is this combination that allows us to face life with courage and peace, knowing that God is in control of everything. Experiencing divine peace. Divine peace is something that transcends human understanding. In the midst of life's storms, when everything around us seems chaotic, there is a peace available that can only come from God. Jesus, in his walk with the disciples, gave us a powerful example of this peace when, during a storm, he remained calm while the others despaired. This shows us that when we truly trust in God's care, we can experience this same calm in our own lives. Divine peace doesn't mean the absence of problems, but rather the certainty that God is in control. This inner peace, born of unshakable faith and trust in God's plan, helps us face adversity without being consumed by anxiety. Many times, the cause of our unrest is our attempt to solve everything on our own without giving our concerns to God. However, when we practice surrendering to God, we recognize that despite our limits, He is infinite in wisdom and power. A clear example of this is when we face difficult decisions at work or in our personal lives. Instead of letting fear paralyze us, we can pray and ask for God's peace to guide our choices, trusting that He will always direct us toward the best path. The Bible offers us numerous verses that speak about this peace that comes from God. One of the most well-known is in Philippians chapter 4, verse 7, where Paul teaches us that by presenting our anxieties to God in prayer, the peace that surpasses all understanding will guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. This verse invites us not to carry the weight of our worries alone, but to trust that God, in His infinite providence, has already prepared the best for us. The practice of prayer and meditation on God's Word is a way to cultivate this peace daily. For many, peace seems unattainable in such a troubled world. However, Christian reflection teaches us that this peace does not depend on external circumstances but on our relationship with God. By trusting in Him, even the most turbulent situations can be faced with serenity. A practical example of this is the habit of starting the day with moments of silence and prayer, asking God to give us peace to face the challenges of the day. This simple practice can completely transform how we handle stress and daily pressures, connecting us to the source of true peace. Another way to experience this peace is to learn to live one day at a time, as Jesus instructs in Matthew chapter 6, verse 34. When we worry excessively about the future, we end up carrying a burden that is not ours to bear. Instead, we are called to trust that God's care is daily and that He will give us the strength to face each challenge in its own time. This trust frees us from anxiety and allows us to live more fully and presently, knowing that God is always by our side, caring for us in every detail. When we are at peace with God and with ourselves, that tranquility is reflected in how we deal with others. Conflicts that once would have unsettled us begin to be viewed from a new perspective, and we are able to offer forgiveness, understanding, and love more naturally. This peace that we receive from God enables us to be agents of peace in the world, bringing that tranquility to our homes, workplaces, and all of our interactions. Finally, divine peace is something that everyone can experience, regardless of the circumstances. It is not reserved for moments of tranquility, but is a gift from God that is available at any moment of our lives. By trusting in Him and giving Him our concerns, we experience that peace that surrounds and sustains us, even in the most challenging situations. This peace is a reflection of God's care, constantly reminding us that no matter what happens, He is always with us, guiding and protecting us. The power of surrendering to God. Surrendering to God is one of the deepest demonstrations of faith a Christian can practice. When we give our fears, anxieties, and desires into God's hands, we are recognizing that He is in control and knows what is best for our lives. This attitude of total trust in God's plan is not easy because human nature seeks to control and understand every situation. However, true peace and freedom come when we acknowledge our limitations and trust in divine providence. Surrendering to God is a daily invitation to place our concerns in the hands of the One who knows all and can do all. This surrender becomes more challenging when we face situations beyond our control. Family problems, health issues, or financial difficulties often make us feel like we need to solve everything on our own. However, the Bible teaches us that by giving our worries to God, He will give us rest. An example of this is found in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30, where Jesus invites us to rest in Him because His yoke is easy and His burden is light. By responding to this invitation, we experience the relief of knowing that we are not alone and that God is taking care of every detail. The practice of surrendering to God can be applied in many areas of our lives. In the professional realm, for example, it is common for people to become anxious about job opportunities or the future of their careers. However, by trusting that God is guiding every step, we can relax and move forward with more confidence. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive or seek to improve, but that as we do our part, we should trust that the final outcome is in God's hands. A practical exercise is whenever a worry arises, pause and say a brief prayer, giving that specific situation into God's hands. Another important aspect of surrender is learning to wait for God's timing. In our culture, we are accustomed to quick results, and waiting can be something that generates anxiety. However, the Bible is full of examples of how God's timing is perfect. The story of Abraham, who waited years for the fulfillment of the promise of a son, shows us that even when the answer seems delayed, God is working. This Christian reflection invites us to trust that when we surrender our lives to God, He will act at the right time, bringing what is best for us. Surrendering to God also involves accepting that what He has for us is always better than what we have planned. Often, we cling to our own ideas and dreams, but God, in His infinite wisdom, has something greater in store. An example of this can be seen in the life of Job. Even after losing everything, Job remained faithful to God, and in the end, God restored his life abundantly. This teaches us that by surrendering everything to God, He will always reward us in ways we couldn't have imagined. This practice of constant surrender transforms the way we view life. We stop worrying about what we cannot control and begin to trust more in God's care. Daily surrender brings us a lightness and peace that are the fruits of unshakable faith in the divine plan. When we live this way, we realize that challenges become more bearable because we know that God is always by our side, guiding every step, even when we don't understand the path. Surrendering to God is an ongoing journey. It's not something that happens all at once, but a practice that strengthens over time. The more we trust Him, the more we experience the rest and peace that come from that surrender. Each day is a new opportunity to renew that trust, to surrender a little more, to let God act in areas we once wanted to control. And as we do this, we discover that He is always present, caring for us with love and wisdom. Overcoming anxiety through trust in God. Anxiety is a feeling that affects millions of people worldwide and is one of the greatest barriers to living in peace. However, the Bible offers us a clear path to overcoming anxiety, trusting fully in God. When we place our trust in God's plan and rest in His providence, anxiety loses its power. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6, exhorts us not to be anxious about anything but to give our concerns to God in prayer. This practice helps us put anxiety into perspective and remember that God is always in control. Often, anxiety arises when we try to carry burdens that were not meant for us. We try to control the future, predict all possibilities, and ensure that nothing gets out of our hands. However, life is unpredictable, and this attempt to control everything only increases our anxiety. Instead, we are called to trust in divine providence, acknowledging that although we don't know what tomorrow will bring, God already knows and is caring for us. A practical example is the story of Mary and Martha, where Jesus teaches that worrying about many things distances us from what truly matters. Mary chose the better part, which was sitting at Jesus' feet, resting in Him. For those who struggle daily with anxiety, the practice of trusting in God is one of the greatest tools one can cultivate. This doesn't mean that challenges will disappear, but that our perspective on them will change. Instead of seeing problems as threats, we can see them as opportunities to grow in faith. A simple exercise that can help is, when feeling the symptoms of anxiety, pause and say a short prayer, giving that moment to God. Taking a deep breath and remembering that God is in control may seem simple, but it has a profound effect on our mind and heart. Another important aspect of overcoming anxiety is focusing on the present. As discussed earlier, much of anxiety comes from worries about the future, which is beyond our control. Jesus teaches us to live one day at a time without worrying about what is to come. This doesn't mean being irresponsible, but rather trusting that God will take care of every detail at the right time. The practice of gratitude is a powerful way to stay present. By thanking God for daily blessings, we strengthen our trust in Him and reduce anxiety about the future. Trust in God also helps us redefine what success or failure means. Many times, our anxiety is linked to expectations we place on ourselves, expectations that are not always aligned with God's plan. By trusting Him, we begin to understand that true success is not in reaching all the goals we set, but in following the path that God has prepared for us. This frees us from the pressure of trying to please everyone or achieve unattainable standards, allowing us to live with more lightness and authenticity. When we trust in God, we also learn to surrender control of situations. Anxiety makes us believe that we need to solve everything on our own, but the truth is that God is constantly working in our favor, even when we don't realize it. The story of Gideon, who faced an army with only 300 men, teaches us that victory does not depend on our efforts but on God's power. When we surrender our battles to Him, anxiety loses its power, and we can rest in the certainty that He is in command. Overcoming anxiety is a journey that requires practice and patience. But by placing our trust in God, we discover a peace that the world cannot offer. Each day is a new opportunity to give our fears and concerns into His hands, and each time we do this, our faith strengthens. Trust in God gives us the assurance that, regardless of what happens, He is by our side, guiding our steps and sustaining us with His love and care. We've reached the end of this reflection, and I want to ask you, what have you done with all the worries that weigh on your heart? Is it time for you to hand everything over to God and trust that He has a perfect plan for your life? From now on, think about how you can apply everything you learned here today. Is it time to start your day with a prayer, giving your anxieties to the Lord? Or maybe dedicate a few minutes to thank Him for the blessings already around you. God invites you to live with more lightness, and the first step is to trust in Him. If this message spoke to you in any way, leave a comment below. Write a word of gratitude or share your prayer request. We'll be praying for you. Remember that when we trust in God, we don't need to fear tomorrow. He is in control of all things. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take the opportunity to do so now. Activate notifications to keep receiving content that will strengthen your faith and help you walk with more confidence in God's plan. May God bless you greatly, and I'll see you in the next video.